Cape Verde, an exotic island world. The archipelago off the coast of West Africa combines the flair of the Canaries with the charm of Africa. Here, explorers Christopher Columbus and Vasco da Gama lay anchor in order to replenish supplies and repair their ships. It was not until 1445 that the 15 islands were discovered and consequently became a Portuguese colony. Only 9 of the Cabo Verde islands are inhabited. An island paradise in the Atlantic with an impressive landscape and diverse culture. A strange, adventurous and hospitable world. We begin in the northeast of the islands, in Sal. Crystal blue sea and endless sandy beaches. Islands of both wind and sunshine. A volcanic lunar landscape, 25 kilometres long and 12 kilometres wide. Sal owes its name and colonization to its once most important export of salt, which was to be found here in huge quantities. Since 1834, the white gold was produced by a salt lake, but today only remnants of this productive time remain. Espagos, the island's somewhat unglamorous capital, is located in the center of the island and extends beneath Monte Hill. With cube-shaped buildings, 1 and 2 stories high, painted blue, yellow and pink, hints of European influence. Yet the church buildings are not at first sight influenced either by Europe or Africa. It all looks so sleepy. Diego Gomes and Antonio de Noli, who were traveling in the service of the Portuguese crown, came across the island in 1460. First they called it Plana, meaning plain. However, following the discovery of salt here, the island's name was changed to Sal. It was initially uninhabited and served simply as a pasture land until the 17th century. Later, African slaves were settled here, and it was they who built the island's most important church, the Igreja Nazarena, a sacred house of the Nazarenes which glows in radiant turquoise. It was the time of the slave trade when the demand for salt and livestock began to grow. The island soon started to develop. Ships laid anchor, and their captains required livestock and salt on their return journey to Europe. A lively exchange of trade began. A combination of Portuguese colonial influences emerged, in addition to African exoticism and vitality. Tourism here is relatively new, so little has changed. The main section of the island is like a plain, brown moonscape, dusty and arid, and the wind always blows from the same direction. It's known as Desert Island, surrounded by the powerful Atlantic. The once bustling village of Pedra Lume on the east coast now looks almost like a ghost town. rusty remains of cargo ships on the rocky shore, silent witnesses of past prosperity. And the wooden skeletons of industrial buildings scattered across the countryside, as if they'd been abandoned in a hurry. Each one a remnant of the former kingdom of King Salt, in which the white gold determined everyday life. Today, a ruined empire. The relentless sun created it, namely the Salina Pedralume, and a history that spans more than 150 years. It lies on the floor of the crater of an extinct volcano just below sea level. The salt-filled water could easily be accessed. Salt was the driving force for the entire island and was shipped to as far as South America. At the end of the 19th century, the salt trade ended. On the other side of the island, Palmeira, otherwise known as Pedralume, is Sal's most important port, from which the whole of the island's maritime trade is handled. This emerging port is becoming increasingly important, yet it's still a picturesque fishing village. Here too, tourism is beginning to appear, and the villagers are excited about new business opportunities. The romantic town itself seems to be very Portuguese, with single-story buildings and spacious parks. Amazing how the endless fields of red-brown boulders with no vegetation slowly transform as they get nearer to the sea. Baia Da Fontana Bay, close to Palmeira, appears like a shady oasis, with various green trees that provide welcome shelter from the heat. In the background, the dominant Monte Leste volcano. Where the slopes reach down to the shore are a unique spectacle of nature, the rock pools of Buracona. Wild, foaming waves roll noisily without interruption into naturally formed pools, the result of volcanic action. While the Atlantic constantly demonstrates its primeval might, the local fishermen continue to find peace and serenity here. Mainly volcanoes and deserts dominate the landscape, and it rarely rains. The extreme southern tip of the island, Santa Maria, is a splendid place. As an oasis in the Atlantic, this former fishing village has become very popular with tourists. The centre is framed by a church and stately merchants' houses. numerous restaurants and shops await visitors who mostly come from Europe, but again, a place little affected by tourism. The crumbling prosperity of the island is well masked by constantly renewed murals on some of the old colonial houses. A perfect way to combine both art and history. But a special attraction is the wide, white, sandy beach which extends to the next harbour along the coast. Where locals bathe and nowadays fishing boats anchor was once a bustling trading centre for salt. It was also shipped from here. Private hotel beaches invite sunbathers to relax. And the strong trade winds have made Santa Maria a paradise for wind and kite surfers alike, a hotspot of water sports. There's bathing here throughout the year, and at sunset, secret dreams come true. Santiago lies in the south, the largest island in the archipelago. Here, the Portuguese, as the first settlers, set up a military post. The population of this fertile island is a very colourful mix of African European. And yet the volcanic origin of the island is plain to see. The family genes and traditions of two continents have produced a population with various characteristics of both culture and lifestyle. Located at the southern tip is Praia, capital of the island, and also the headquarters of the Cabo Verde government. The magnificent presidential palace is clearly the centre of local government. During Portuguese rule, the island's governors resided here. Today, it's the domicile of the president. Monuments such as that of Governor Caetano Alexandre de Almeida commemorate the time of Portuguese rule, as well as the independence of the former Portuguese colony. This was duly proclaimed on the 5th of July 1975, when a frequently sad chapter in the island's history drew to a close. Praia lies on a narrow plateau around 40 feet above the old port. The Catholic Church of Da Graça frames the centre along with the city hall and palace. The Igreja Nossa Senhora da Graça in neoclassical design is dedicated to the Madonna. Its interior impresses by its simplicity, and the stucco rear wall of the main altar. The rich orange-coloured town hall lights up in welcome style, its square tower being in keeping with the presidential palace. The nearby market is full of African flair. Its fresh supply of vegetables, fruit and exotic spices is the finest in the whole archipelago, a treat for the senses. Located west of the capital is an imposing fortress situated on the rocky plains of Ribeira Grande, the Fortaleza Real de São Felipe. Since 1999, this huge building has been open to the public. Between 1580 and 1640, Portugal belonged to Spain. In this period, the fortress was built and named after King Philip of Spain. The occasion gave rise to a successful invasion by English corsair Sir Francis Drake. In 1585, the royal pirate attacked with 25 ships and more than 1,000 men, so major defences were subsequently built here. There's an impressive view down to the town. Cidade Velha, the old town, and the place where Cabo Verde's history began. Here the first Europeans met with Africans, a fusion that created a new culture. The former name of the settlement was Ribeira Grande, named after the nearby Great River Valley which flows into the sea. It was the only settlement here for many years. And also the first major settlement in Europe's colonial states overseas. The remains of the cathedral indicate its former dimensions. The oldest colonial church in the world, whose construction began in 1555. In 1692 it was completed and consecrated by the Bishop of Santiago. From the beginning, his main task was to baptize the local slaves. The rather inconspicuous location next door was a trading center for slaves from the African mainland. The Portuguese were probably the most feared slave traders of that time. They trapped the population of entire villages on the West African coast, brought them here, and sold the slaves in Brazil and throughout the Caribbean. The Nossa Senhora do Rosário Church is more than 500 years old, and its little cemetery provides shelter for the graves of the first Portuguese here. Its church bell and richly decorated altar were stolen by Sir Francis Drake and shipped to England. The building remained intact. The tiny buildings of Rua de Banana, in typical Portuguese style, were reconstructed true to the original with the help of UNESCO. Low, elongated stone houses covered with straw line the narrow road that leads up the valley upstream from the sea. At the beginning of the valley are the ruins of the São Francisco Church. A tiny bell tower dominates its gable. The first Franciscans arrived here at Ribeira Grande in 1466 and set about Christianizing the African slaves. In 1834, Queen Mary II dissolved all the monasteries on Portuguese territory. The complex was abandoned and fell into disrepair. Volcanic landscapes covered in herbs abound with fertile spaces. Two volcanic mountain ranges of lava dominate the structure of the island. As green as the name suggests, the Cape Verde Islands have long ceased to be green. They're simply set in the wrong place in the Atlantic Ocean. Around 500 kilometres from Senegal and at the end of the Sahel zone. And that means wind and sand, and much Saharan sand. In the middle of the island is Assomada, a small town in a sheltered and privileged position. In both north and south are mountains from which flows moisture to the lowlands. So the landscape soon became an agricultural area. Indeed, more people settled here than in the former capital of Ribeira Grande. And even today, the city looks at first glance like a small South European town, but with less traffic. The weekly market transforms the image of the city. Traders are to be seen everywhere, seemingly ad hoc all over the city. It's a vibrant place. Each free space is used as a marketplace. Everything is sold here, wild and basic and very African. The women proudly carry their belongings on their heads. North of Assomada, the street winds up to Serra Malagueta, a rugged mountain landscape with spectacular cliffs. Wild and unspoiled nature, often cloaked in mist, and after the rainy season covered in a soft green fur. The up to 1,000-metre-high mountains are a splendid sight. This adventurous mountain region is highly evocative. God created the world and looked happily down upon the earth. Masses of stone, sand and clay fell down. This formed 15 islands that rose from the waves to create the Cape Verde Islands. Since 2003, the majority of the mountains that extend in a west-east direction are protected and are in what is known as the Parque Natural Serra Malagueta. The east coast is mostly deserted and uncultivated, so it looks romantic and magical at the same time, almost a foreign world. And yet people once settled here, isolated and with their own laws. These are the so-called rebelados, to whom a private museum village is now dedicated. From 1941 to 1960, They were politically persecuted, so retreated to this rugged and relatively inaccessible area. The reason was the arrival of white priests who wanted to spread the true teachings of the Catholic Church. This on behalf of the Salazar government with the full knowledge of Pope Pius XII. Previously, the Barrio culture kept alive its own African-inspired religious traditions, which the newly arrived clergy strictly prohibited. One group did not comply and withdrew to this remote area. The small village of Espinho Branco became a living village of the ancient culture. Here, people lived in reed huts, modestly, according to the ideals of Christianity. Due to the initiative of artist Misa, Rabelate was formed. Here, young artists paint motifs of their everyday life, and lovers of modern art enjoy the works of the young Rebelados. Near to Charbom on the northwest coast is an infamous former concentration camp which has now been declared a national monument. As a museum of resistance against fascism, it's a reminder of its multiple uses as a prison camp. From 1936, about 300 opponents of Portugal's Salazar regime were imprisoned here. In 1961, they were followed by resistance fighters from the African colonies who fought for their independence. Farther north is Tarrafal, with its small semicircular bay and white sandy beach occupied by fishing boats and bathers. Baia Verde gives the impression of the Caribbean, judging by the number of coconut palms that line the beach. The wealthy inhabitants of the island's capital, 80 kilometres away, like to travel here in order to relax beneath the palm trees. It's a sleepy place, situated on a small plateau, and in the dusty streets there are a small number of bars. Around the central square is a bank, church and market. The inhabitants live on fishing, farming and tourism. The exterior of the old Santo Amaro Abade church, with its tower and Baroque facade, promises more than is offered within. Here, simplicity prevails and suggests the simple life of the local people. Tarrafal is quite lively in the morning when the fishing boats return fully loaded from the night's fishing and the catch is examined. When the kingfisher awaits the sunset, the islanders know why they love their little paradise. São Vicente, a centre of culture. This small location north of the city consists of Mindelo, rocky coasts, desert-like valleys, and red-brown mountains. The bustling port city is considered to be the unofficial capital of the archipelago, although the island was settled much later than its counterparts. Mindelo, the Porto Grande, a natural harbour created by a collapsed crater. There's a good coastal plain which once proved to be ideal for colonization. Here live the majority of the island's population, and where both bustle and chic are part of the cityscape. Squares, streets and buildings give the impression of a European city with much colonial atmosphere. Here, British immigrants, Creole slaves and sailors from around the world created a cosmopolitan melting pot. The pink presidential palace of Portuguese design is the president's place of residence when he visits the island. Nowhere else on Cabo Verde are there more magnificent government buildings than here. The foundation stone for the large old market hall was laid in 1878. Everything is well ordered and organized. Meat, fruit and vegetables, the best that the islands have to offer, as well as products from around the world. Colourful, ornate mansions with fine balconies are reminiscent of the heyday of the original city, a legacy of prosperous times. When this port became a major maritime stockyard for coal. Explorer Diego Alfonso could never have imagined that one day the first overseas telephone cable would be laid here, especially as the telephone had not yet been invented. Since its establishment in 1928, the fish market is still a popular meeting place, especially with the local women. It's busy, especially when a fresh catch arrives, with fish of all colours and sizes. Here it's valued, then sold. Immediately next to the fish market is the symbol of the city, a replica of the Torre de Belém in Lisbon, a mighty watchtower. From 1920, the Portuguese governor and the Port Authority were accommodated within this monument. Mindelo is considered to be the cultural centre of the archipelago, in which typical Creole art has been preserved. Sparse, raw and untamed, extends the hinterland of Mindelo, dominated by powerful, almost mystical mountains. A narrow and bumpy road leads up to the mountains. The view from here is overwhelming, a reddish-brown backdrop of rubble and stones. The road travels further. Again and again, stunning views of Mindelo's natural harbour, which determines the lives of the islanders. Originally, Monte Verde rightly deserved its name. Everything was green. Maize, potatoes and beans grew here. But then came the devastating Sahel drought. And the fertile landscape became a stony desert. Life changed, but nature gradually adapted to it. And the stormy Atlantic continues to blow its thunderous waves against the rocky west coast. But the small fishing village of São Pedro is set in a favourable location. Well protected by the foothills of the volcanic mountains and the sea, a few pastel-coloured cottages form the village. Here life is peaceful and more demanding than in the nearby town. During the day, the men go about their duties, including seeing to their fishing nets. Many young people leave the island because despite its beauty, Cabo Verde is one of the poorest countries in the world. Freed from the yoke of slavery in 1878, many severe droughts followed. But despite its hardships and tragic history, Cabo Verde is now a carefree place at peace with itself. The road to the east coast runs past rugged lava rock, sand dunes and rough seas. Constant wind creates a good supply of sand due to erosion. Scattered fishing boats line the waterfront, ready for the next trip. The busy fishermen take little notice of the few cars that come to this eastern side of the island. Its volcanic origin can be seen everywhere. The geologically young Viana volcano is located about 3 kilometres south of the small fishing village of Calau. It's actually quite dull and lifeless. Erosion has had little effect on the once fire-breathing volcano. Its structure is plain to see. The rocky floor of the caldera is tranquil now, but the power of the natural world has well and truly made its mark here. Red-hot lava once spewed from this volcano. Ash and rock rained down upon the vineyards, orchards and fields. And even today, it's difficult to predict when the next eruption will take place. The romantic sunset is a captivating sight. With the regular ferry from São Vicente, the most northwesterly island is easily accessible. Santo Antão, an island of mountains, wind and water, the second largest island of Cabo Verde. Soon we arrive at Porto Novo and the passengers disembark. In the island's largest city, a statue of a woman appears to be bidding farewell to her husband, who's been forced to emigrate. colourful fishing boats on the black, sandy beach, which extends right up to the quay. At lunchtime, everything seems to be deserted. But it's usually quite lively when the ferry arrives or departs. Then the men sit playing cards or enjoy the old strategic board game of Orel. Between modern concrete blocks are a number of buildings in colonial style, painted in soft pastel colours. Religion gives people security and helps the daily struggle for survival. But few visitors stop for long on the south side of the island. The crossing of the mountainous centre of the island beckons, and a real adventure begins. Santo Antão's most important route is a road over the high mountains. Again and again, stunning views of the brown, craggy peaks. Occasionally, small houses of natural stone and with thatched roofs appear, a robust design typical of North Island. There's a small chapel set amid the mountains. The road climbs further. The colossal mountain scene becomes even more impressive, and between the craggy mountains are green, meandering valleys. Skillfully layered terraced fields appear on the slopes. Curiosity drives us on. To an impressive collapsed crater which is situated 1,170 meters above sea level. The diameter of its caldera measures about 800 meters. Even here, the fertile volcanic earth has been put to good use with terraced fields. There's an almost tropical climate amid these bizarre, untamed mountains. The road continues. The views of the Paúl Valley take the breath away. A fairy tale world of stone which looks truly surreal. Against the background of this scenery, clouds entangle themselves within the mountains and provide life-giving moisture. The ingeniously designed mountain road then leads down into the Vale de Paúl Valley. The deep-cut valley shines out in luscious green. It's mainly sugarcane that's grown here. Tiny settlements bring life to the dramatic landscape. The stone buildings are built much like those in the mountains, but their external walls have been plastered. A fertile paradise, even though nature here often presents itself as wild and inaccessible. Next to sugarcane grow bananas, corn, coffee plants and dates, and in between, mango and papaya, a hidden Garden of Eden. Santo Antão distills the finest grog in the whole archipelago, a strong liquor, clear as water. In so-called grog mills, sugarcane is produced, once with presses powered by oxen, today with machines from Brazil. pure syrup is collected in containers. For about 5 days it's stored in barrels to ferment, and then boiled in a copper still. Distillation commences after an hour, but the first distillation is too strong. Only an experienced grog burner knows exactly when the liquor is suitable for drinking. The road leading to the coast was actually only completed in 2008, an undulating route between cliffs and within deep valleys. And along the road, several small settlements appear, clinging like glue to the hillsides. The closer to the coast, the larger the villages. Here the construction methods continue according to age-old tradition. Space is scarce. Finally, the valley opens up and the proud Riviera Grande appears on the narrow coast. The island's capital is a bustling meeting place for both locals and tourists, with shops, restaurants, a post office, banks and hotels. Despite many structural changes, the centre of the city has managed to retain its charm. Narrow lanes and a bumpy pavement, and colonial houses with colourful facades. It was here that colonization of the island began. Next, a Catholic church that the bishop of that time allowed to be built by slaves. Today, the city is an ideal base from which to explore the north coast. Ponta do Sol is quite modern. The Catholic church, with its solitary bell tower on the left, dominates the rather sleepy settlement. In the middle of the 19th century, a number of fishermen settled on the peninsula. In 1887, the headquarters of the district administration of Riviera Grande were transferred here. The magnificent and prominent town hall is a reminder of the small town's importance. 2 roads lead from the main square down to the small port, which since the founding of Porto Novo only seems to belong to the local fishermen. It's here where the real life takes place. The fresh catch is taken by the women, the colourful array of fish being offered immediately for sale. The round trip ends in the idyllic Vila de Pompas. Despite its modest appearance, a picturesque sight. The buildings are arranged around a small church. And the city hall is also located here as a past mansion of colonial times. The local people work in the sugarcane plantations and in fruit and vegetable production. A peaceful atmosphere, hard to believe of an island set amid the Atlantic Ocean. Great discoverers such as Christopher Columbus and Vasco da Gama sailed past these islands, where both fishing and salt were at the centre of everyday life. Where legendary pirates such as Sir Francis Drake pillaged and plundered the island, and slaves went about their daily chores. Where gigantic volcanic mountains alternate with deserts and tropical valleys. Each island is unique, and each has its special charm. Cabo Verde, islands full of light and joie de vivre.